The story of Europe's largest ransom is something everyone has heard once in their lives. If that doesn't ring any bells, then you probably didn't know about it. Well, if that's the case, then we will tell you all about it. Freddy Heineken was one of Europe's richest men, who had built his family's brewery into a multi-billion-dollar powerhouse. On November 9, 1983, gunmen seized him and his chauffeur outside Heineken's Amsterdam headquarters, sparking a global manhunt for the missing billionaire, his kidnappers, and the $11 million ransom. The voice of Freddy Heineken crackled as a tape recorder was pushed against the mouthpiece of a payphone. This is the owl. Is the ransom ready, and is the mouse present for immediate departure? Heineken's words triggered an unprecedented operation as his family's namesake company prepared to transfer one of the world's largest ever-known ransom payments, the equivalent today of $30 million in 4 different currencies, weighing over 200 pounds. Meanwhile, Dutch police readied themselves to arrest the kidnappers, who had seized headlines around the world along with one of Europe's richest and most famous businessmen weeks earlier. Alfred Freddy Heineken, grandson of the founder of the Heineken brewery and the marketing and deal-making genius who had made the company's beer a global brand, left his office in central Amsterdam on a cold evening in November 1983. He expected to be greeted by his long-serving chauffeur, Abdotterer, but instead, he was confronted by men carrying guns, who, after a brief scuffle, bundled him and his driver into a delivery van. Operation Rolls-Royce. What Heineken couldn't have known at the time was that his mansion, office and daily routine had been under surveillance for months by a gang of 5 men who had planned with military precision a crime that was meant to net a king's ransom. The men stalking the billionaire, Cor van Hout, Willem Holleder, Frans Meyer, Jan Boellard and Martin Urkamps, had met as teenagers and young adults in a hardscrabble district of the Dutch capital. The gritty Amsterdam of charismatic ringleader Van Hout's youth contrasts with the modern Netherlands, which has shuttered prisons as crime rates have fallen to record lows. In his account of the kidnapping published by Dutch journalist Peter R. de Vries, Van Hout paints a picture of early success based on a legitimate construction business, scoring property deals by using strong-arm tactics on squatters, along with other shady activities that resulted in brushes with the law. Van Hout claims the men started to seek a big score after an economic downturn cramped their passions for luxury cars, race horses and partying. Former Dutch police, however, suspect that Van Hout's property deals and business were just a cover for his gang's involvement in a series of unsolved armed robberies. Before the kidnapping of Heineken, the Netherlands had largely been untouched by an epidemic in Europe during the previous decade of high-profile kidnappings, motivated by profit and politics. But Van Hout and the other men began to scour the society and finance pages of the Dutch press for targets. Heineken, a champion of Dutch business, was already on the men's radar for reasons other than being filthy rich. In Van Hout's words, Van Hout talked of sneaking looks at the beer magnate's Mercedes-Benz as a child, and his friend Holleder's father was a long-term employee of the brewery before he was dismissed for disruptive behavior. We were generally very picky. The victim had to be very rich but could neither be royal nor a politician. In addition, the candidate needed a cast-iron constitution. Where do you find someone like that? A Superman, said Van Hout. Heineken and Dotterer were rushed to a West Amsterdam warehouse where a false wall had been built to contain 2 soundproofed cells. The kidnapping was meant to last only 48 hours, but it eventually stretched over 21 days. The driver and the billionaire were stripped of their clothes and belongings and chained inside the tiny rooms, isolated from the outside world and each other. Heineken later said he'd feared that he'd been kidnapped by West Germany's notorious Red Army faction and worried that the cell's air pipe would fail. His kidnappers celebrated and then returned to their normal routines in order to avoid raising the suspicion of friends, family, or police before making their ransom demand. Heineken, who ruled his company with an iron will, did not appear bowed by the kidnapping, even as his detention stretched from days into weeks. Van Hout recounted that the kidnappers were impressed by Heineken's grit and humor. He really had a strong character, this man. He was almost a kind of psychologist, said Van Hout. The then 60-year-old butted heads with the gang over food and conditions. The kidnappers were confused by his demands for consommé and other delicacies, and he tried to bribe one of the captors into releasing him. Heineken, shackled to a wall of the cold, dank cell, later painted a bleak picture of the conditions. I always kept one slice of bread to eat at night or the following morning, because you're never sure that there will be bread the next morning. The ordeal weighed heavily on Dotterer, who had worked for Heineken for 40 years, and the kidnappers themselves voiced remorse about the toll on the driver. Don't lose my wits, I must keep busy to stay alive. After a few days, I made a program for myself to keep busy. I tried to do exercises despite everything. I had to keep busy, Dotterer told reporters after his release. The ransom. Eagle. Hare. Mouse. Owl. The kidnappers had put exacting attention into their plan to communicate the ransom demand and exchange via coded messages and cutouts to baffle detectives. The gang made contact by dropping an envelope with Heineken's watch, Dotterer's papers, and a ransom note at a small police station. Police were ordered to signal that the ransom was ready with an advertisement in the personal section of a Dutch newspaper reading, "The meadow is green for the hare." The gang had closely studied famous kidnappings, like those of Getty and Lindbergh, and they had an equally elaborate plan for the handover of the ransom. A recorded message from Heineken and Dotterer played back over a call from a payphone would direct police to the first of a series of buried messages that would lead detectives on a trail across the small country. The penultimate step was a car with a walkie-talkie that would be used to radio instructions to stop on a highway bridge and drop the ransom into a storm drain. Heineken's words triggered an unprecedented operation as his family's namesake company prepared to transfer one of the world's largest ever-known ransom payments, the equivalent today of $30 million in 4 different currencies, weighing over 200 pounds. That is it for the video. If you enjoyed it, kindly hit the like button and subscribe to our channel.